I am a passionate NFL fan. When we got Sky many years ago so that we could watch cricket, I rediscovered the NFL and found it a welcome alternative to costume dramas on a Sunday evening. It's an absorbing world with its own vocabulary. In the NFL, you can be penalised in a match for unnecessary roughness, which of course suggests that necessary roughness is allowed. There's also a phase in the NFL calendar called the legal tampering period, which sounds all kinds of wrong until you realise it's about players moving as free agents from one team to another. The NFL allocates players to teams through what's called the draft. The worst team last year gets the first pick in each round through to the best team getting the worst pick in each round. The idea is to make the league as fair as it can possibly be. And that means the combine is a place at which all the prospects leaving college football are measured in all kinds of ways against each other. That's to help each team decide the order in which they want to pick their prospects in each round. But all that counts for nothing if you cannot stay on the field. As a great NFL coach said years ago, your best ability is availability. Your best ability is availability. Being able to stay on the field is what makes all of your other gifts and skills you may have relevant. That came to mind when grappling with this passage, because I was really struck first that the harvest and the labor are out of sync. The harvest and the labor are out of sync. There's a great harvest to reap, Jesus says, but it seems those willing to reap it are few. It reminded me of an incident a few years ago of someone who was willing to be trained to do prophetic prayer, listen to God for someone and then to pray for them. But while this person was willing to practice this in church, they told me they wouldn't dream of using this gift outside church with someone who wasn't already a Christian. They were too afraid of getting it wrong. But what's the point of receiving a grace gift if we simply will not use it? Yes, there'll be no mistakes, but also no harvest. In contrast, I'd like to mention Pete Marston and Andrew Greenfield. These two members of our 10:30 congregation taught themselves to drum so that we could have drummers at that service. That was bold because, like a goalkeeper, frankly, it's hard to hide a mistake as a drummer. But they were willing to step out and to do something that felt risky to serve the rest of the congregation. Jesus is telling us there is a harvest much greater than the number willing to work. That at least implies much of the harvest will not be reaped. When Jesus tells us to ask for more workers, the root of the word ask is actually beg. It's not the same word Jesus uses when speaking about asking, seeking, and knocking in Luke 11. We are to beg the Lord, passionately entreat and beg the Lord to increase the workforce. Otherwise, much of the crop will go unharvested. The word translated send out is similarly strong. It's the same word used in Mark 1:12 where the Spirit drives Jesus into the wilderness to be tested. We are to beg the Lord, whose harvest this is, to drive, to thrust forth workers into his harvest field, because otherwise much of the harvest will rot. But why, I found myself wrestling. What's the constraint to be overcome? Is it that the Lord is unwilling to send? Well, clearly not. He's just sent 72 others out to be kingdom ambassadors. So if the Lord isn't unwilling, then the constraint is within us, within God's people, that we are reluctant to go, that we are resistant to being sent. The hard truth seems to be that the harvest is greater than God's people's willingness to reap it. So we are to beg the Lord of the harvest that enough of us among his people will be stirred to hear his call. Enough of us will accept that he has the right to send us, whether that's near at hand to the streets around us or across the world. Our greatest ability is availability. The fields are ripe for harvest in our culture now. Steve, if we could have thank you. The Bible Society's report, The Quiet Revival, makes for startling reading. It's based on a YouGov poll conducted in all of their normal ways that had more than 13,000 participants. Between 2018 and 2024, overall church-going just in England and Wales rose from 8 to 12%. That's a growth from 3.7 million to 5.8 million. That's nearly 1 in 8 adults attending church at least once a month in England and Wales. If you're a statistician, that is 56% growth. Much of that growth has not been within Anglicanism. It's been within Pentecostalism, Roman Catholicism, or Orthodox churches. Churches that offer a distinct spirituality and have a clear voice about lots of issues. In 2018, the next slide, just 4% of 18 to 24-year-olds said they attended church at least once a month. But in 2024, that had risen to 16%, with attendance among young women rising from 3 to 12%, which is a 400% rise, and attendance among young men rising from 4% to 21%, which is a 525% rise. Of all age groups, this group is now the second most likely to attend church regularly. Yet it's not all good news. In the 55 to 64 age range, attendance fell from 10 to 8%. In the 45 to 54 age range, attendance fell from 6 to 5%. In other words, those key age groups that used to have the energy and the experience to run churches, disciple young people, and generally make stuff happen, have rather gone missing across all churches. So we have this real opportunity of a flowering of faith among the young. Many coming because God is drawing them almost in spite of church. Many young people in rural areas have just gone into empty churches to pray. Many young people have been given Bibles, they've read the scriptures. Many young people, this is happening almost in spite of the church. And yet there's a constraint among the workers. The harvest is plentiful. This is strong research by a reputable company based on large sample sizes, much reference in the secular media this year. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Will we beg the Lord to thrust out more harvesters into his harvest field? Even if that means us. Even if that means you and me. There are always reasons to say no. There are always reasons why now is not the right time. And for some of us, that's right, not the right time, not the right season in life. That happens. There are always reasons to say no. But what about all of the reasons to say yes? Will we hear his call? Will we accept his authority to send us? Second main point, the way the Lord sends. The way the Lord sends. Towards the end of a mission I went on to a diocese in southern Sudan, we were taken to see the local Roman Catholic mission in Shuaibet. I was really glad we only saw it just before we left. I'll tell you why. I'd accepted the tough conditions that we were in because I thought we had no choice. Long drop toilets, washing in the open, mosquito nets, and yes, sleeping in polyester tents in equatorial Africa when it didn't get much below 25 degrees centigrade at night. I'd accepted that. The local Roman Catholic mission, in turn, looked like a colonial holiday camp. Showers, tick. Hot water, tick. Running water, tick. Beds, yes, tick. Electric lights and plugs, yes. As tired as we all were, it made me grumpy even to see it when we'd been sleeping 250 yards from this palace. But it also seemed they were apart from the people, safe behind a 3 to 4 meter high security fence, a perimeter fence, that held themselves apart from the people. And I wondered how difficult it was going to be to bridge that gap. I'm not sure that's the way the Lord sends people often, or at least it certainly isn't in Luke 10. Here those sent out are sent out in a vulnerable way. Notice that they are sent out to need the people to whom they're sent. Need them for hospitality, for food, for shelter. They can't stand at a distance and shout because, verse 4, they have no purse, no bag, no food with them, no spare footwear. They're to accept the lodgings and the food that they're given, verse 7. And definitely not to look to trade up to a better bed, as I definitely wanted to do when I saw that holiday camp in southern Sudan. They're sent in a mode of need, not strength. They're not above those to whom they're sent. They are called alongside, not held apart from them and hidden away behind a perimeter fence. And of course, it also means that they have to trust the Lord who has sent them. Trust in Jesus is pretty much the only equipment they are allowed to take with them, aside from someone with whom to walk, to pray, and to minister. They have to trust in their relationship with Jesus. Trust that the kingdom is still coming near, even when it's them bringing it. Daring to do that, to trust in the Lord and to lean into him, was how the 72 learn what they report in verse 17. Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. In other words, God can be trusted to honor those he sends and those who are willing to go in his name. None of this is easy, of course. It requires us to take risks. It requires us to step out into places where, if the Lord doesn't come through for us, we will fail. But we cannot learn how he works in those moments unless we are willing to step out. Sometimes we have to start to drum when others are actually listening. Sometimes we have to dare to prophesy over someone outside the safe confines of the church. Sometimes there is no alternative. If we're going to obey, going to grow, then go for it. We can't learn that kind of faith, that kind of courage in a laboratory environment. We can only learn it by going and doing. We can only learn it by trusting Jesus in the moment and trusting that he will be with us. How willing are we to trust Jesus and learn to lean into him as we go? Third main point. The Lord sends us to wage grace. The Lord sends us to wage grace. Last Sunday's protests were a confrontation, really, between the far right and the hard left. If one side had Palestinian flags, the other had UK, Israeli, and even Iranian flags just after the war had begun. The Echo reported that the counter-protesters had tried to block the protesters' route into town, had to be prevented from doing so by the police. Before they left, the protesters regularly chanted, "Our streets, our streets, our streets." When the protesters arrived in Guildhall Square, they wore hijabs to mock them before swinging them around their heads and chanting, "Free the face." One trade unionist was quoted in the Echo as saying, "We need to sweep these far-right rats into the sewers." Clearly, our situation here is a proxy for lots of other issues, but it's getting expressed locally, and in some ways, it's really ugly. But we won't shift the situation in Portswood by coming against it ourselves in an angry or confrontational manner. Notice what the Lord tells the 72 to do here. They're told effectively to wage grace. When they arrive either in a house or town, they are to bless with God's peace those they encounter in verses 5 and 6. Wherever God's peace is welcomed, they're told it will remain on that house or that community, remain presumably and deepen. If it's refused for whatever reason, then God's blessing, they're told, will return to those who have proclaimed it. Even the way they leave a community that's refused to welcome them is to accept their refusal, but also to urge them that the kingdom of God is still within reach, verse 11. Going beyond proclaiming God's blessing and shalom, they're also told in verse 9 to heal those who are ill as a sign of the presence of the coming of the kingdom of God. In other words, they are to minister God's kingdom in word and deed. And as they step out in this way, it provokes a decisive change. Buzzing on their return, the 72 say in verse 17, basically, Lord, it works even when you're not there. Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. As the 72 did then, we're to go out onto our streets and to pray for God's peace and God's presence to come. And do so trusting that the kingdom of God coming near will lead to lasting change in our community. We cannot be those who shout louder. We have to be those who speak peace. We can't express hatred and aggression. We must be those who pray for the healing of our community. We can't afford the luxury of contempt for those with whom we disagree. We must love our neighbours. Yes, Highfield House Hotel residents. Yes, protesters. Yes, counter-protesters. All. They are all our neighbours in one way or another. Our words and attitudes have got to be filled with grace. They have got to be a genuine expression of our heart for the peace and prosperity of our community. That is asking a lot from us, I know. But that's what it means to wage grace. How willing are we to take our place in waging grace on our streets and in this community? So what does all this mean for us today? It challenges us first to confront our own unwillingness. To confront our own unwillingness. The constraint is on the willingness of the workers, not the heart of the Lord, not the size of the harvest. The constraint is on our unwillingness to go. In what ways are we reluctant to play our part? Reluctant to be sent, reluctant to go? Now, you might think, well, I'm too old to play an active role. But you could still be someone passionately begging the Lord for more workers to be willing to serve. You might think, well, I am too busy to play an active role. But to what extent does that choice reflect your priorities? And if you are too busy to play an active role, which may well be the case in this season of your life, you're surely not too busy to pray, or perhaps to give more financially to release other people to be sent. For example, we have people like Tim Dorby, who is serving in mission with us while actively trusting God for his provision. His salary is mostly raised through ministry partnership development. That's through individuals giving to support him. So if you don't want to give more to Highfield, you could choose to support someone like Tim. Or perhaps give to our youth ministry as grant funding is coming to an end. That will be a way of sowing into the harvest if you haven't time to do more. We also have ministries where plans to grow are constrained by a lack of volunteers. An example would be the desire to subdivide our Highfield kids groups so that we have 3 school age groups, not just 2. That would be better for the children in every way, but finding team is the constraint. Another way might be to help provide a creche at the 10:30, for much of our growth at the moment is at the bottom end of the age range. Or to join one of our hospitality teams. It's one of those areas in church that we have many more people wanting to drink coffee than willing to serve it. So if you wanted to serve, there are opportunities. Could one of those be the role to which the Lord of the harvest is calling you? But also, if you wanted to give specifically so that we can sow into these plans for growth, then you could do that as well. Play your part in the harvest, especially in this season where the harvest is plentiful. Through praying and giving if serving isn't possible. Let's not let our unwillingness be the constraint on the harvest the Lord longs to reap through Highfield. The challenge is second, to embrace being sent. To embrace being sent. I'm sure the 72 did not feel wholly equipped. Yes, they'd been given authority and sent, but I'm sure there was much more they would like to have been told and shown before they went sent out. I'm sure if they'd had a smartphone, they would have been emailing in lots and lots of questions. But Jesus sent them out to learn by doing. To trust that God would show them in the moment how to respond and what to do. To trust that God would make them confident and competent through his presence. It strikes me that a willingness to embrace being sent is absolutely key to the harvest here. And so very many of us, since we left school, have never been placed in a situation where we didn't have a choice about what to do. So many of us have never been in a situation where we didn't feel absolutely competent about what we were going to do. The older we get, the harder it is to take risks, the harder it is to step out and say, Lord, I don't know how to do this. Lord, I don't know how to drum, but I'm going to learn. Lord, I don't know how to prophesy, but I'm going to learn. Lord, I don't know how to prayer walk, but I am willing to trust you and step into this. So many of us, as we get older, we value our competence highly, and we don't like risking looking a fool. We don't like risking failing, because actually we don't do that. That's not who we are. And the harder it is to step out, the harder it is to risk failing, the harder it is to learn anything. Because what we see with the 72 is Jesus sending them out and them having to learn through doing. The biggest challenge for us to learn anything new is being humble. Humble enough to say, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to step into it. I don't know how to do this, Lord, but I'm going to trust you and I'm going to try and trust that you will meet me along the way. Verse 21 is quite startling. Jesus celebrates just how much the 72 have achieved by being willing to learn like little children. Learn like little children. And that the wise and the learned are not able to learn like this. Why? Because they're afraid of making a mistake, afraid of stuffing up, they're afraid of looking less confident, competent, afraid of their dignity being diminished. They aren't able to learn like this, maybe because they're too proud, maybe they're too invested in the old ways, or maybe because they're not willing to humble themselves to Jesus' leading. Where might we need to humble ourselves to his leading? Where might we need to be willing to learn by doing? To learn by trusting Jesus and being willing to go? And by willing to pick ourselves up and have another go when it doesn't go perfectly according to plan.